So today we've got a 2006 BMW M5. We're going to be doing a Dynon lowering spring install on this car. For the most part, it's a pretty straightforward DIY that you could definitely do on your driveway, and we're going to showcase how to do it kind of step by step so that we have a good reference to look back while you're working on this. The only special tool that I would probably recommend getting is a strut spindle spreader. We'll show you that exactly how that goes. But other than that, you'll just need basic 13mm sockets, 16mm and 18mm sockets, some wrenches, nothing crazy. So without further ado, these are going to be the springs we're going to be putting on. We're also going to be putting on the supplemental ride bump stock kit that they provide in the, well, they don't provide, but they sell it separately. So it'll be a comprehensive install. And yeah, we'll get to it. One of the biggest benefits about going with a lowering spring as per se a traditional coilover kit is that it still retains the factory strut. And in this model for the E60 M5, that means you can keep the EDC, the electronic dampening control, so you still have the functionality between comfort, normal, and sport. So you can change it up depending on your day-to-day driving. As far as the only downside is that it does wear out the shocks a lot quicker. It'll be even more pronounced of a bumpier ride if your shocks aren't particularly in the best condition. So typically I recommend, you know, if you're gonna go with the lowering spring, to go with like the Bilstein, I believe it's like the B8 strut. It's a really good combo for this car. But if you just want to lower it on a budget, this paired with the stock struts works absolutely okay. That's definitely how I ran my M5 for so many years. If you decided to go with the coilover kit, the only one that retains the EDC function is the Bilstein B16 kit, which will be installing in a couple cars pretty soon, so we'll showcase that, but that's the only one that does it. But this is definitely a good bang for buck upgrade if you want to lower especially the front of the car to a more leveled stance, whereas these cars kind of have like a raked, you know, where the front's a little higher. It's a good approach. It doesn't sacrifice ride quality too much, make it a little bit stiffer, but overall it's still a pretty comfortable ride. So these are actually used Dynon springs from a car that I uninstalled them from and went on coilover setup, but you can pick these up on marketplace for sometimes as cheap as $100 depending on where you look. So just keep your eyes out open. You sometimes find some really good deals. But yeah, we're gonna start installing these babies and swap this out, put these in. If you ever watched our rear lowering spring install video, this is the makeup for it, because I know quite a few people saw that and they left a lot of thumbs down. So hopefully this actually really kind of replaces a lot of the content that we've made in previous times, and now that we have the shop, it's going to be a lot more, you know, DIY and more professional. So this is a makeup to that, and we're going to make it up with the control arm video too, so stay tuned on that one. We're making our mistakes. We're fixing our mistakes, so that way we can bring better content. So first step is going to be to loosen up a 16mm screw bolt right here behind where my hand's at. I don't know if Jay can get back there with the camera, but it's going to be right here. There's a 16mm bolt here. Then you've got an 18mm bolt here. It's held on by an 18mm nut on the other side, so you have to counter hold it with a wrench. But once you get these two out, this whole bracket's going to swing out of the way, and it'll allow you to open up the strut so you can get the knuckle pushed down. We're going to do that right now. And pro tip, just put the nuts back on the bolts that they come off of, so you know exactly which goes to which. And now that we have those two bolts out of the way, you can see this kind of swings out, so I usually just leave it right here in the corner where it's out of the way. And I also, with this bracket, I go over here to this box, if I can open it with my fingers, like that, and I pop out both of the cables. And the reason why I do this is because when you push this knuckle down, it's gonna wanna put a lot of strain on the brake hose and on this. So I try to like prevent that as much as I can. This one, obviously you're not gonna be able to do much, but just do know when you're pushing this down, this is gonna get some tension. So just note of that. So now that we got those out of the way, it's time to use our special knuckle strut spreader tool. Looks like this. really simple in design, honestly. So what it does is there's a slot back here in the knuckle, and it slots right in like that, and then you basically use a ratchet and you turn 90 degrees so that way it spreads this open enough to slide this entire assembly down. Before you do that though, make sure you put a jack somewhere here I usually do it on the control arm, so that way you can control this movement downwards. Otherwise sometimes this will just drop all the way and you could damage the rotor or something. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that we got the tool in, it's spread the knuckle open. This should come down pretty easily. Not always, but gotta do that. Sometimes it helps to like wiggle from up here. So that's as far as you need to go for now. Now we're gonna move to the top. So now that we're here at the top, we've got our jack underneath supporting the entire knuckle. We're gonna go ahead and remove this entire cover assembly. It's pretty simple. There's gonna be a connector here that has two little push tabs. Kind of just do that, pull it out of the way. And then these are held on by the 3 nuts, and you sometimes have to use a screwdriver to kind of pop them off, but we already did that, so that just comes out like that. And then there's this middle connector that goes to the strut. It literally just pulls straight up. So once you get this out of the way, then you have access to the 3 13mm screws, or nuts I should say. Pretty simple, just take them off and you'll see this entire strut come down. Just sometimes it helps to have a helper to kind of hold on if you're not careful enough, so that way it doesn't drop out. But we're gonna go ahead and remove these. Usually this back one here, gotta use like a ratcheting wrench to get to. Okay, so now this is free. What I do is I just go ahead and bring this all the way down. And this is kind of the most difficult part of the install in my opinion, is getting this to clear the fender liner and the fender without scratching it. We're gonna go ahead and put some masking tape on the lip so we can prevent it as much as possible. And I usually put a towel on the top so that way when we're kind of getting it maneuvered out of here, try to prevent as much damage. So we're gonna do that right now. This is the hardest part. It's kind of, sometimes you gotta rotate this out of the way. So usually I push down and I rotate the top hat to clear the studs, and you'll get it to a point where it's gonna come out kind of this way. Sometimes you do have to lower the jack a little bit. Just like that. Now, I'm going to carefully, with the rag, bring it down. And this is the tough part. Just like that. We got one that just cleared. Now I just rotate it to clear the second one, and then the third one kind of goes like that. So I'm always constantly pushing down and rotating this top piece at the same time. That way it kind of clears the fender liner and it clears the fender. And that's why we have the tape here and we use the rag, so that way this doesn't scratch that. And now that you get it to this point, you can easily just twist and kind of pull, get the strut out. Sometimes they're a little stuck. You might have to put like WD-40 or PB Blaster, and that's pretty much it. So usually what I like to do is try to keep tension off of this stuff. I'll just grab the jack and I'll kind of just jack it up, and I use just like that. Kind of keeps tension off of this as much as I can. Put this in here. So now that's compressed, we're gonna take this off. I believe it's 24 millimeter. Sometimes the nut's gonna spin, so I usually get like some kind of rag with a soft jaw vice grip to kind of hold it. Just like that. And now we're good. So this is safely able to be disassembled. Just like that. Now we can put our new lowering spring on. So just a quick comparison between the Dynon lowering spring and the stock M5 one. You can tell it's a little bit shorter. They wind the coils up a little differently, and this, I guess the metal is a little different, so it can kind of compress a little more compared to the stock ones. So, but luckily the pigtail ends are the exact same, so everything will fit up exactly like the OEM ones. Not only from the Dynon, but like the ABOC one and the H&R ones are similar springs as well. But these are not the most aggressive ones. I believe the most aggressive ones are the H&R springs for the E60 M5. So if you're looking for a little more low, that's gonna be a more preferable choice. But this one gives you a moderate drop, but still feels very comfortable. Hence is the reason why we're going with this one. So now that we have the old one out, we're gonna go ahead and put the new one on, and we'll show you exactly how the new one goes onto the old strut with all the washers and all that stuff, so you get it on right. So this is the difference between the stock OEM BMW bump stop and the Dynon supplemental ride quality kit. It's just a much shorter bump stop, so that way when the car is under load, it's not riding on the bump stop, so that's why it's a little shorter. It's not a required piece of the lowering springs, but we do recommend getting it. This used kit so happened to come with it, so it's a nice addition to the installation. But it's really simple, you just gotta swap them out. They only go one way, so you can't really mix them up. And then, yeah, I just wanted to showcase the differences between the two. I would probably recommend getting it, so that way you're not riding on the bump stops when you're lowered. So the order of installation for the parts on the front struts of this car is going to be, you're going to have a lower isolator spring. It's got a notch right here, so it lines up with this. Can't really mix them up, they just go like that. Then you got your bump stop, again, only goes one way. Usually the tapered end faces down. Put that on. You've got a spring seat washer that goes right here. Do not forget that. And then we'll put our lowering spring on. And the more narrow end goes on the bottom, and the top. Get it to fit just like that. And that pretty much goes right to the very end right here. Goes like that. And now we can get our dust boot and spring bearing, all that stuff. So put that all together. It's a little tough, but it does go all in. Sometimes you do have to get this dust boot to go over. Just like that. And you'll probably have to use the spring compressors to compress this down, so we'll go ahead and do that right now. So we went ahead and replaced the upper strut perch, and we replaced the bearing too, so this pretty much just drops in like that. And we're just gonna go ahead and slip this guy on, just like that. And as you can see, we have the pigtail right at the original location where it was at with the stock spring. I want to put it there so that way, you know, it tries to make as minimal noise as possible. And pretty much that's how it really goes. Don't forget, there is a washer on the top. These are very critical, so don't forget to put those back on. Get the nut, and we will tighten this up. got the strut all put together. Got the washer, the upper spring seat, the bearing, the metal dust plate, the dust cover, washer inside, bump stop. Everything's lined up with the isolator. So now it's time to put it back in the car. You can only put this in one way because there is a notch here, and you can kind of see how it went in back, you know, when it sat in there for years. So you just gotta line that back up with the groove here in the knuckle, and you'll feel it seat all the way. Just make sure it seats all the way. You don't want it like halfway in. I've seen that happen before, so do pay attention to that. So now we're just gonna put it back in. Just like that. Now we're fully seated. Cool. Now it's 100% in. So now same thing, kind of push in and rotate those studs one by one underneath the fender, just like that. And away we go. Take our rag. Now we just gotta line everything back up. Some cars, they have the, we should have mentioned it earlier, but we'll cut it in. Some cars have an alignment pin. Some other cars don't. The alignment shop will remove it. If you have the alignment pin, just make note where it went back in. If you don't have it, mark it before you take the strut out. Reference that in the beginning of the video before we do this shit. And then, you know, that way you can go back together without changing the alignment too much. This is where two people definitely comes into play. Makes it real easy to line this up. Have one guy on the jack while another person lines everything up. I kind of have to do everything by myself, so I'll just kind of line it up as I go. Just like that. Get it all the way up. Let's get our screws back on. Try to get the strut back in line where it was originally. Which is like right there. Kind of can see a little outline. Go ahead and snug these up. We just have them snugged up for now. Once we put the car back on the ground, we'll torque these nuts to spec. So once you got the strut all backed in, you got it nicely firmed inside the knuckle, you have the 3 nuts snugged up. It's time to put the 18 and the 16 millimeter bolts back in for the sway bar bracket. Just gotta line everything up. Just like that. Put our nut on this side, and do note for the ABS wires and brake wires, there is a hole that this attaches to, so make sure that goes into that bracket like that. Put your nut back on like so. If I can get it on, there we go. And then the 16 mil is going to be here in the front. Might have to kind of play around with it a little bit to get it to line up. It's a little hard for the camera to see. If you're having a hard time putting that 16 mil bolt in through the bracket, it helps to kind of bring down the knuckle a little bit so you can relieve some tension off the sway bar end link. Now we can go ahead and snug these up and tighten them to spec. By the way, torque spec for this 18 millimeter screw is 81 Newton meters. You are supposed to replace the screw, so do note of that. Go ahead and get the torque wrench out for that. Now we'll go ahead and put our cables back in. Make sure everything's good. And that pretty much wraps up the front. So the rears are, I personally think, a little more trickier than the fronts, but still very doable. You're gonna have to remove some interior panels to get to the three 13 millimeter nuts at the top of the strut. This car is missing a few clips, but there's typically one here. There's gonna be one here where my finger's at. You'll have one here, and then you'll be able to remove this panel completely and fold this one away down so you can get access to wherever you need to go. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then we got one here, one up here, that one's missing. And now you can fold this down, and you're mostly going to be working back here in this upper corner behind all those wires. As you can see, here's the EDC damper controller connector, so you just want to pull it apart. I'll put a flathead in between the connectors and lift out. Sometimes they come apart with a good tug, other times they're like this. As you can see, easy as that. Look at this little foam piece back here. Now you have access to the three 13 millimeter nuts up here. So we'll go ahead and undo those now. You want to just barely loosen them. Just get them loose, but don't take them out all the way because we still have to take out the big screw at the bottom. And also don't drop these inside. They are pretty difficult to find if you do drop them. So do note of that. So for here underneath the car, you've got an 18 millimeter bolt that goes through the shock behind where my finger's at. You're gonna also remove this 18 millimeter screw and nut to get this out of the way to give you some more room when you pull this out. And it also helps to remove the sway bar end link nut on both sides, so that way you can push this down further and give you some more additional room as well. It's kind of how I do it. Usually I start off first with removing the 18 millimeter sway bar end link nut at the bottom that connects to the control arms. And I do that on both sides. Next is this 18 millimeter bolt and nut back here. I usually get it with my long ratcheting wrench and get my other side here. There's no eccentric on this, so you don't have to mark it. You just have to loosen it and get the hardware out so you can move this arm out of the way. That. Now I just pull back on the whole strut and you have enough room. But before you can actually move it out of the way, you'll just have to disconnect this 18 millimeter. It's a really big screw that goes in, and I do recommend replacing that. It is on there tight, so you probably have to use quite a lot of leverage to get this loose. That's why we left the nuts on top still in place, because it makes it a lot easier to get this loose. tap on that, and now you can kind of pivot this in that direction. And we'll go ahead and undo the nuts at the top. Helps to have a second person on the other side to try to prevent the strut from just dropping. But let's see. So now we can kind of drop it. Now that I also loosened up this sway bar end link, you can kind of swing it out of the way like that and give you a little more room. It's kind of a little tricky, but you kind of have to point it downwards at an angle. And kind of get it at the right angle like that, and then just carefully. Kind of an angle game, just like that. This is the rear shock assembly, kind of similar to the front, except instead of the front where we have a cable that detaches, this one actually stays in place, so it makes it a little more trickier, but nevertheless still very doable. So you got this little cover, you just have to pinch this with the flathead screwdriver and pry it up, and it just pretty much comes out like that. And then you'll have this nut, and you have like a threaded portion, or not threaded, like something that you can hold on with a wrench. I believe it's like a 7mm, and this isn't really on too tight, so you'll be able to break it loose without too much force. Obviously use the spring compressor because this is still under a lot of tension, and this will all come apart and go back together just like the front. So to get that nut off, it's gonna be an 18mm ratchet, and then to hold it, it'll be an 8mm ratchet as well. Kind of helps to have two people doing this, but I'm gonna try to do it with one. Kind of have someone step on the spring, and then just kind of break it loose like that. Now we can get that nut off, and remove the upper mount. Sometimes this gets a little stuck, so you might have to use like a mallet to give it a little bit of persuasion. It will pop off. Just like that. And get it off. Out it goes. So we're gonna assemble the rear shock again. It's pretty straightforward. You're gonna be going from bump stop to the washer, to the spring, to the upper mount, to the other washer, to the nut. So in that order. So we'll go ahead and put this back on. Let's get it right there. Put our washer, it only goes one way. Put our Dynon spring, which has the compressed coils facing towards the bottom. Get that pigtail seated right into its home. And now that helps to get this pulled up as much as possible. Fish our wire through our upper mount. Again, the upper mount has a spot where the end of the pigtail sits. Now we'll go ahead, put our washer, and then our nut. It's a little tough to do this. You might need two people, one person to compress, and while the other person threads on the nut. And we'll go from there. Now that we got this all reassembled the way we should have, now we're gonna fish it back up. Again, it really helps to have another person for this back part because you can have someone hold the wire up while you fish it back in. So to put it back in the car, carefully. Do you want to be careful to make sure you get this wire in all the way without it tugging up between the chassis. Gonna have to line up the strut just like that. To put our 13mm nuts back on. Again, we'll tighten these fully once the car is back on the ground. Just want to snug them up for now. So now that we got the strut back in, we'll go ahead and take our new strut bolt, which is the big 18mm, and we'll go ahead and thread it back in. Just like that. We'll torque it in a bit. Go ahead and get this control arm back on. Back up the control arm. Put a little bit of tension on this suspension. And then we'll torque the big strut bolt to 105 Newton meters, and we'll snug up the other control arm. It's a little tough to get a torque wrench in that area, so just put it nice and tight. Just like that. There is a headlight leveling sensor that you do have to take note, so make sure you remove this before you bring everything down fully. So we're finally wrapped up. As you can tell, the front has dropped quite considerably compared to the stock ride height. On average on these springs, it's about 1.5 inches, and then in the rear, it's about 3/4 of an inch. It's not as aggressive in the rear, but the front definitely comes down and it gives the car a much more aggressive stance. And I personally think it looks a lot better. And the best part is you still retain the EDC functionality and you don't lose any of the creature comforts that the car originally came from the factory. Overall, it's a pretty, I would say, someone like, you could do it definitely on your driveway. A little tough here and there, but definitely not something that you have to always have someone else do for you. Other than that, I mean, it's the best bang for buck upgrade you can do for the suspension if you want that lowered stance without having to go for coilovers. So this one's all wrapped up, it's ready to go. The owner is ready to pick it up. It's already almost 12:30 in the morning, so I think it's time to wrap it up. Always a long night here at the shop, but whatever you guys want to see, let us know. We'll be definitely making more content for the channel with all of the work that comes through here at this point. So if there's something in particular you want to always see, just let us know in the comments and we'll try to definitely try to do the DIY, or if you just want to see how it's done. So appreciate the love, thank you so much. Please rate, comment, like, and subscribe. I can never remember that off the top of my head. And you know, keep liking our content, because we're gonna definitely make out some more stuff. So until next time guys, appreciate it.